Hello everybody. My name is Josh Tolkien. I'm the director of the Maryland chapter of Sierra Club and also a proud resident of Silver Spring, Maryland. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We have an excellent panel who will be talking to you about different aspects of an incredibly important issue of how we can promote solar within Montgomery County, land-based solar, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, some of the really exciting innovations that have been occurring recently. You'll be hearing from a variety of experts on everything from agrivoltaics to pollinators to some of the technical issues that we'll be dealing with. My co-host for the evening is Shruti Bhatnagar, who's the chair of the Sierra Club Montgomery County Group. We'll be taking questions throughout the event. And we've gotten a lot of your questions before the event. And the basic flow tonight is that we're going to hear from each of our speakers for about 5 to 10 minutes. We're going to not take questions along the way, but we're going to save up for a lot of time for the Q&A at the end. I will be one of your co-facilitators. If I do my job right, I will be talking as little as possible because we have such an excellent panel tonight. I'm sure to remind me, do we want to do the introductions up front or introductions as we go through each of the speakers?
Yeah, I think we should do the intros for all the speakers first, and then I will present the remarks and go on to our panelists.
Wonderful. So I'm just going to run through some of the speakers that you're going to be hearing from tonight. First, Shruti Bhatnagar is the chair of the Sierra Club Montgomery County Group. She's been a grassroots advocate in Montgomery County for almost 2 decades with a strong background in civic engagement. Shruti has a breadth of leadership in corporate, nonprofit, and community organizations and a commitment to public service. She's made an impact on policies, especially with an equity lens on many issues, serving the county on boards and commissions and led initiatives at the state and the county level, organizing through collaboration and community partnerships. Climate change is Shruti's #1 priority. She supports the Black Lives Matter movement and is a mother of 2 children. David Smedick is a senior campaign representative for the Sierra Club in the Mid-Atlantic. David's ongoing work is to build a movement that strives to push states and local jurisdictions off of dirty fuels like coal and frack gas towards a more prosperous and just clean energy economy. David previously worked in Atlanta, Georgia on green building sustainability issues and is currently living in Baltimore with his wife and his dog. Crystal Hansley is the CEO of We Solar. Brings affordable and accessible community solar energy to under-resourced communities and assists commercial properties with energy efficiency. Before founding We Solar, Crystal was the director of government and community relations for Neighborhood Sun, a leading community solar energy enterprise in Maryland, where she helped thousands of low to moderate income families save hundreds annually on their electricity bills. Before transitioning to sustainability, Crystal was a Capitol Hill staffer for former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton of Washington, D.C. Crystal is on the steering committee for Baltimore People's Climate Movement and on the board for other organizations. She is a classically trained pianist, opera singer, and proud dog mom to her mini poodle, Jade. I did not know that last part. Dr. Al Bartlett is a retired pediatrician and public health physician. Since retirement in 2015, he's been working on climate change as a critical health issue, focused on moving from fossil fuels to clean renewable energy, especially solar. He's a member of Public Service Commission's working group on community solar. He's participated in legislative working sessions on solar siting and led collaboration with the Maryland Association of Counties on a symposium on this issue for local government officials. He's also worked with the Sierra Club local groups and county governments in 6 counties in deliberation on solar siting. He lives in Montgomery County. Your 4th speaker is Doug Boucher. He's a retired scientist who lives with his wife Charlotte on their 77-acre farm in Dickerson in the Agricultural Reserve. He has a BA in ecology and history from Yale and a PhD in ecology from the University of Michigan. He's published over 100 scientific papers on agriculture and forest ecology, climate change, and land use. Rob Davis is the director of the Center for Pollinators in Energy at Fresh Energy. Rob Davis helps accelerate the nation's transition to clean renewable energy. His work on pollinator-friendly solar has been featured in trainings by the U.S. Department of Interior's National Conservation Training Center, which is an amazing program, and the U.S. government's U.S. Department of Energy in featured stories such as Fast Company, American Bee Journal, Foodprint, and a talk titled "This Unlikely 1960s Space Tech Can Help Save the Bees" on a TED.com. Previously, Davis helped launch technology startups and created the internationally crowdsourced campaign that launched the Firefox web browser. And lastly, but not leastly, Hans Riemer is an at-large member on the Montgomery County Council, serving in his third term, and is the lead sponsor for the Zoning Text Amendment 2001, which is one of the topics for tonight. Hans is the chair of Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, and also serves on the Transportation and Environment Committee. As a council member, he works towards his vision of advocating to fund public education and public transportation, early childhood programs, libraries, recreation, human services, housing, and economic development. He's a dedicated environmentalist, and he has worked to strengthen Montgomery County's superb rural, suburban, and urban areas by placing walkability, public transportation, and sustainability at the center of our planning goals. Folks, I really am thrilled with the breadth and diversity of the views that you're going to be hearing tonight from this panel. I wanted to thank Shruti for inviting me on to help co-facilitate for the night and for the impetus for me to find a reason to shave. All of these make me very, very excited for this evening. So Shruti, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Josh. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shruti Bhatnagar, and I'm the chair of the Sierra Club Montgomery County Group. I want to just begin by thanking all of you for taking the time to register and participate in today's webinar. Welcome. I also want to thank Josh Tulkin, who's the director of Sierra Club Maryland, for being the co-facilitator for this webinar with me today. And thanks to all our panelists who have taken the time to prepare some presentations and help share information with all of you on this issue that we know you all really care about. So I just want to start by sharing some remarks and some background information that I hope will be helpful before we turn it over to the panelists and listen to their presentations and then open it up for Q&A. So it was about the late 2019 when we were informed and we received information about this proposed EPA that Councilman Hans Riemer proposed. And the Zoning Text Amendment, as you know, will allow just under 2% of the 93,000 acres in the county's agricultural reserve to be used for small solar projects serving multiple county residents. This will provide about 300 total megawatts of solar power, a relatively small part of the county's total solar need, as you'll hear more in the presentation. Now, while Sierra Club didn't initiate the ZEA, we did give due consideration, had several internal discussions, reviewed our national and state policies, and after making some recommendations to help strengthen the legislation and improve it, and several substantial amendments, we now support the ZEA. We understand this is a complicated and sometimes contentious issue. There has been a lot of information that has been circulated, and in many cases, we have felt it has been incomplete, inaccurate, or even misleading to many who are not quite into having enough information. So this webinar aims to present important fact-based information that underlines the Sierra Club position. The webinar is not set up as a debate. Those who have a different position as ours have widely circulated their position and concerns. We will, however, be addressing as many possible of the questions that are out there, from why we cannot build all the solar we need somewhere else, to the issue of soil types and more. We'll also be providing some new and very interesting perspectives on solar. But before we turn onto those presentations, I want to put our position in the context of Sierra Club's highly respected environmental work and our policies. Sierra Club is above all a conservation organization. We work to protect our precious natural environment, and in that way we have common cause with farmers and land preservationists. However, in the world we live in right now, the relentless reality of climate change threatens all of our environment, as well as the health and well-being of people everywhere, including farmers. As we considered the ZEA, This reality of climate change was the overriding determinant. It's not a future threat. Here in Maryland, we've seen everything from intense waves to multiple 100-year floods in Ellicott City to water in the streets of Annapolis. There has been documented change of our growing season. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has put us on notice that we have just 10 years to make unprecedented progress in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Our county itself has ambitious goal for greenhouse gas reduction, 80% by 2027. Every year we don't take effective action, these goals just become less achievable. There are many things we need to do to reach these goals, but cleaning up the electricity sector, moving off fossil fuels to wind and solar, is the area where we have the proven, low-cost, scalable technology to do it now. Increasing energy efficiency, changing to electric cars, trucks, and buses, and moving to all electric buildings will take a lot longer and will use even more electricity. But making this happen means building solar on open land. Every county in Maryland is dealing with this issue of the need to put some solar on agricultural land. Our state and local Sierra Club members have worked with local government in multiple counties in their deliberations about this challenge. In our case, the vast majority of our agricultural land is in the ag reserve. In every case we follow the approach established in our national and chapter level policies on solar energy, citing that it's not possible to achieve solutions that balance respect for agriculture and for land with the urgent need to address climate change. We believe that the proposed ETA with the modifications that have been made is such a balanced approach. So let's turn to the presentations and then the Q&A section that will take on additional points. We also want to thank you for the questions that you have submitted ahead of time. Our panelists have taken a look at them and we will do our best to address those questions as well as the questions that we received from you through our Q&A chat at the bottom of the Zoom that you all have available. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Al Bartlett. Al, you have to unmute yourself.
No, Shruti, actually, David is first.
Let's go with David Smetic.
Cool. That works for me. All right. Thanks, Shruti and Al and Josh. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully everybody is now viewing it. So, all right, there we go. If there are any technical difficulties, Josh, feel free to text me and I'll fix things off. But I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. As everybody mentioned, my name's David Smetic. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a senior campaign representative with the Sierra Club here in the Mid-Atlantic. And I live in Baltimore, and I'm really excited to be working on fossil fuel and clean energy issues across the entire state. What I'm trying to do here at the outset is really just provide a 80,000 foot level, 100,000 foot level look at our electric sector in Maryland and climate action. What are kind of the long-term goals we have? What are the upper boundaries that we're talking about? What is the framework for this conversation that we're looking at from a bigger perspective? And then our next panelists are going to drill in even deeper. So I'm going to be pretty quick here, but I wanted to provide a stage setting. So I'm going to briefly talk about what we've all known very quickly, why we care, and then really dig into the contribution and what our framework laws are governing us. So Shruti already gave a big overview here, but we're all here, I think, largely because we care about climate disruption. We're seeing global impacts that are, really devastating even capital cities globally, and then locally here, we're seeing pretty significant impacts already. Just this past July, we broke a record for number of 90-degree days in Maryland at 25. So we're seeing these changes now and the impacts as we speak. So we have a lot of work to do. We have to be a part of the solution here within the state of Maryland to lower our climate pollution. So what does that mean? Where is this pollution coming from? What's our role? And this comes from the Maryland Department of the Environment. It is their most recent official greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So this is our climate pollution data set. And what we see pretty clearly here is 3 big buckets of pollution associated with climate change for the state. Transportation is number 1. Electricity consumption, number 2. That RCI fuel use, I think some of you probably heard Shruti say earlier, we need to electrify our buildings. That RCI fuel use, that's the fossil fuels we combust in our homes and businesses, primarily fracked gas, some oil, that kind of stuff. But what we're really talking about today is what's this electricity consumption work that we're dealing with here in the state of Maryland. And it's still a significant chunk of our climate pollution. So to help clarify a little bit again, Maryland is a net importer of electricity. So we consume more than we actually produce within our state boundaries. So that 30% pollution contribution actually is a combination of both what our power plants in the state are producing and what is associated with the electricity that we're importing. So in 2019, this is approximation numbers. I was doing some quick calculations last night, and based on some information from the US Energy Information Administration, you can see here again, we imported around 36% of the electricity that we consumed in 2019, give or take a few percentage points, but you get the idea. So what does that mean when we're talking about imports? Again, I said it's coming from outside of our state boundaries. Well, that means a whole lot of things. Maryland is part of the PJM grid. It's actually one of the largest electricity grids in the entire country, serving the most number of consumers, et cetera. And it really spans across the entire region, from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We even have some sectors out in Illinois. So all of this interconnected grid is where our electrons are flowing in and through, and we can get electricity from all over the place associated with that. So what is the pollution associated with those imported electrons? It depends. Overall, we still have a fossil heavy fuel mix in our grid. We're seeing increases in solar, wind, and other renewables, but overall we're seeing a huge increase in fracked gas use. We're seeing a decline in coal, but it's still there. And we have this kind of steady hum of nuclear operating in the background with us. This is an example. If you go to PJM's website, which I linked very tiny in the bottom corner there, you can see kind of real time what the operations are of the grid in PJM. So you can see at 8 p.m. the other night when the sun had gone down, wind wasn't really blowing, we were pumping a lot of gas through our power plants and charging us up that way. So that's one example. That also shows we have a long way to go, sneak peek here, in terms of what the clean energy deployment we need is. What are we talking about in-state though? And I'll start to speed up here a little bit. But our in-state generation has seen a pretty significant change over the last couple of years, and we'll get to that in the next slide. But again, approximations in 2019, we saw a big chunk of our in-state power plant power coming from nuclear power plants, the Calvert Cliffs power plant in Southern Maryland. We've seen this 35% from gas is a pretty significant increase from where we used to be. And we still have 14% coming from our coal, even though we have a number of those coal plants still operating. Our clean energy, hydro, wind, solar, again, there's a few small percentage points, but a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it was basically zero. So we're starting to see some good increase there. This is just a small preview of some of the larger plants where they are in Maryland. A 50 megawatt plant, for reference, the largest coal plant in Maryland is about 1,250 megawatts. So these are some solar facilities or wind facilities, but really what we're looking at in terms of large electricity producers in Maryland, it's primarily still fossil fuel. And this is what I was referring to change over time. These graphs are a little hard to read. They were developed from one of my great colleagues, an analyst that works out in California. But what I really wanted to highlight was if you look at the bottom right of the line graph, you can see a steep decline over the last few years in coal, an increase in gas, and some small increases in our clean energy when we're talking about percent of total generation. So we're seeing good progress. Don't get me wrong. Our laws that we're going to get to here soon are moving us in the right direction, but we've got some more work to do. And it's not just climate pollution that we care about when it comes to our electricity sector. There are significant other pollutants associated when we burn coal and fracked gas or oil. Looking at some data from the EPA in 2019, you can see our carbon dioxide, our climate pollution coming out of smokestacks on the right. You can see our dangerous sulfur dioxide or our dangerous nitrogen oxide, which forms smog in there as well. So we still have thousands of tons of unhealthy pollutants coming from our electricity sector, and that really hurt our lungs. They deposit into our water systems in the Chesapeake Bay, and it's all sorts of nasty stuff that we're still seeing from the fossil fuel sector here in Maryland. Looking at what we have as our top level frameworks again for the state, and I know we're going to drill into Montgomery County specifically in the next couple of presenters, but helping kind of steer us in the direction of what's governing our overall state policy agenda. We have, thankfully, we are one of the few states in the country to have a legislatively mandated climate pollution reduction target. We are required by law to reduce climate pollution at least 40% below 2006 levels by 2030. And we have a goal of 80 to 95% reductions below 1990 levels by 2050. So that Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act is charting the course for how we actually reduce this pollution and grow clean energy. We also have energy efficiency programs, regional initiatives across states, and Empower and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Those are two programs that are really, really critical when we're looking at the electricity sector and continuing to reduce our consumption and limiting the amount of pollution from our power plants. But what we really are interested, I think, really steering this direction, steering in the direction of for the rest of our conversation is, what about solar? What do we do? What are the state laws that are driving this increase in solar and this increased demand for solar across the state? And we're looking at two really fantastic laws. The Maryland Renewable Portfolio Standard, which says that we need to reach X amount of renewable electricity consumption by X year. And right now we're at 50% requirement by 2030. What that includes are some carve-outs for clean energy. I always tell people we have some great offshore wind carve-outs. They could be more, but we have a good carve-out started there. But again, for our solar conversation, we have one of the most aggressive percentage-wise requirements in the entire country in terms of what we're trying to seek from solar. So 14.5% of the state's electricity is supposed to come from in-state solar resources between 2028 and 2030. And we're, if you remember from our earlier slide, we're at a few percentage points. So we have a long way to go. The demand is really important, and it is required from in-state solar resources. And the reasoning behind that in-state requirement is to help clean our local grid. And we see huge economic benefits that people will probably touch on later presentations. The local hiring, the local investment in, and the local tax base that is growing from solar is really, really important. And then of course, our Maryland Community Solar Pilot Program. And the next speaker, Crystal, is gonna speak. She knows this thing inside and out, works in it. I don't need to get too far into it, but it was passed, legislation was passed in 2015, and it was recently extended again to establish a pilot program to make sure that we are increasing Maryland residents' access to solar power. So the Maryland Renewable Portfolio Standard and the Maryland Community Solar Pilot Program laws are some of the best demand programs that we have to increase our solar energy consumption here in the state. And with that, I think that wraps up the stage setting that I was asked to do. Excited for the discussion and the question participation, but I think that next I'm handing it back to Josh or Shruti, who are going to then kick it one more time over to Crystal. I appreciate everybody's time, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, David. I just want to mention that we have about 10 minutes for each presenter, just so that our guests are aware of our schedule. So with that, Crystal.
And good evening to everyone that's on this call. It's 7:30, so shout out to all the heroes that's taking their time away from dinner and their families and being a part of this great conversation. My name is Crystal Hansley, and I'm the founder of We Solar, a community solar organization that launched out of Baltimore, Maryland. I also want to give a shout out to my amazing colleagues, Neighborhood Sun. I'm joined by the CEO, Gary Skolnick, as well as the Neighborhood Sun team and the We Solar team, who's also on this call. And today I'm just going to go over a general overview of what community solar is and its benefits to Marylanders, and specifically emphasizing the community solar Act of 2015 and how that literally create economic savings for those who need it the most. So I'm going to share my screen. So yes, this pretty much is a community solar farm. And the way it's set up right now, without community solar, 80% of households do not have access to traditional solar. And so community solar just breaks the barriers that traditionally been only for homeowners. And this is just a great way for everyone to have access to it because you don't need to own a home. So just picking up from the previous panelists, thank you for that nice transition. I want to highlight, let me just get this little pointer right here because I need you guys to really zero in on this point. The Community Solar Act, which was the House Bill of 1087, I am bringing receipts. So don't take our word for it. This is a webinar where we're just giving facts. Created the Community Solar Act of 2015. And that act is pretty much a commission of the Public Service Commission where they're the government body to kind of work out the kinks as we get this pilot program launched in the state of Maryland. But as you read here, the Public Service Commission has adopted regulations for a community solar pilot program in Maryland with an emphasis on providing renewable energy benefits for low and moderate income customers. So, like I said previously, 80% of households did not have access to solar energy. And what Maryland did when they created the pilot program is that right here, as you can see, that there's a strong emphasis on making sure that low and moderate income customers have access to solar when that simply wasn't the case before. And as we move further on the PSC's website, the Public Service Commission, you see about 125 megawatts was set aside for the projects to focus on low and moderate income customers. And we're gonna go into some of that facts of how that works, but let me just back up and just show you how community solar works. As you saw on the first slide, you have an off-site location where the community solar farm is built. That's where the solar farm literally generates power and it powers your local electricity. Shout out to Neighborhood Sun for this graphic. Then it's just smoothly, there's no hassle, no fuss. You receive electric credit, virtual credit on your utility bill. So for Montgomery County, that's PEPCO, or some that's more north, that's BG&E. And you receive savings. The way that the pilot program was created, you receive direct savings, guaranteed savings, not like the deregulated supplier, guaranteed savings. And that's only done by community solar. And you pay us for the power used and the rest is paid to the utility. So nothing changes when you sign up for a community solar pilot program. So some of the benefits, or the biggest benefits, let me just move this. Like I stated for community solar, is that home ownership is not required. We know that this is the largest barrier to getting rooftop solar, traditional solar, because you have to be a homeowner. I'm a millennial. I don't own a home. I'm renting an apartment. So now I actually have access to solar. Why should I be left out? And why should Americans who do not have a home shouldn't receive some of the savings that solar energy provides? No bothersome installation. So for those who may not have money to update their roof, or if they have a roof that's pointing, you know, shading north, like that's not conducive for solar. It needs to be south, southeast, southwest. That's the best setup to have rooftop solar. No upfront costs. Obviously, the way that the community solar pilot program was created in Maryland is free 99. So you don't have to pay anything. If you go through eSolar, if you're fortunate enough to get into a pilot program, then yeah, you just automatically start receiving savings. Like, how beautiful is that? It's cheaper than your utility bills. Obviously, that's why you would sign up. Energy independence. Like we stated, Maryland has to get their energy from other sources. So this is a way where we can grow our own energy in state and supply local jobs. Less pollution, we obviously is offsetting our carbon footprint, and we're supporting the local economy, green jobs in our own backyards. We're in the middle of a pandemic and an induced recession. How great is that we're looking into community solar and possibly exploring how we can build out more community solar and creating the green jobs here in Maryland and specifically Montgomery County. Next slide. So this is the area that we solar like to focus on. It creates the economic resilience for low and moderate income households. Like I said, we launched out of Baltimore, Maryland. And so obviously for communities of color and low income families, we're experiencing higher asthma rates. We're sitting next to the incinerator. And so these communities traditionally have bear the brunt end of environmental injustice, and community solar is just one of the solutions. There's 40,000 asks for Black Lives Matter. One of them is equity, and pretty much this is a way that we can even the playing field by allowing low-income families into this just transition and into environmental justice by allowing them to have the savings that clean energy provides when they've been the ones dealing with the most brutal force of environmental injustice and directly impacting their health. We're in COVID and it's literally attacking those with asthma. So you can see the direct correlation for those who have suffered from environmental injustice, and even right now while we're trying to get our way out of this pandemic. Our current BG&E LMI household saves $300 a year, and that's about anywhere 8,000 in 20 years. Like again, that's pretty huge savings just by clicking a button and signing up. That is huge for lower income families as well as moderate income families, just automatic savings because it's locked into the legislation. If you sign up for a community solar program, it locks you in for savings for decades. How cool is that? Being a part of the Neighborhood Sun team before launching off to We Solar, these are just some 74% of low and moderate customers live in underserved communities, and 51% of all BG&E customers are low and moderate income. So this is how it really impacts their community in a positive way by being a champion of community solar, is that once we build these farms, 51% of them could be for low and moderate income, meaning they have a way. We can meet that 2030 goal. Imagine every household being able to have solar as an option. Right now, there's just not enough farms built for that to be the case. And everyone should have an opportunity to have solar power. You shouldn't just be a homeowner with the ability to have solar. So a lot of you like to know that how does this benefit the environment? When the average American household switches to solar energy, around 5 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions are offset each year. So if you join a community solar and that's 90% of your historical usage, you're a part of this number. You can't do that if you're just doing rooftop solar, or if you're marginalized and you don't have access to this and we don't continue to build on the legislation. So this is really huge. And just rounding us off, as far as the economic and the industry, community solar is growing at the 5-time rate as traditional rooftop solar because of its inclusivity and accessibility, and the jobs that it brings. It's just the latest, coolest, hottest thing in the solar space. And this is my last slide. Millions of Americans can't afford the upfront cost of a rooftop solar array, and thousands of others have been disappointed by the pricing schemes of the third-party energy providers. Community solar brings reliable savings, no hidden charges. This part right here has been an issue. And that's a part of, environmental racism, where a lot of energy companies in the past went to the hood, went to these underserved communities. I deal with this every day, and they don't trust. And community solar, We Solar, have been the vehicle where we're literally bridging that trust again for our communities that have been preyed upon and promised energy savings, but there's no accountability in the legislation that actually guarantees the savings. Community solar does. And so everyone on this call can help bring that guaranteed savings, clean energy savings, to just more Americans, more citizens in Maryland, and specifically Montgomery County, because there aren't any community solar farms right now in Montgomery County. Right now, if you are within Montgomery County, you have to go through Prince George's County. You're connected to another offsite location because we simply don't have any in Montgomery County. So thank you for your time, nice and sweet. And I am passing it off to my fellow panelists, which is
Thank you so much, Christy. That was an amazing presentation, and we will move on to Al Bartley.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I can't see you, but it's good to know that you're all out there. Thanks for the interest. And let me just see if I can get my screen up for you. Okay. So my job this evening is to talk about where we can build solar in Montgomery County, or I think as Shruti alluded early on, to answer probably the most common question that we hear, which is why can't we just build it all on rooftops? So to start, we actually have to think about how much solar we actually need. Back in 2018, when we were working on energy legislation like the Clean Energy Jobs Act, we actually calculated how much solar and wind we would need when we get to 100% clean renewable energy. And the answer for Maryland is that we'll need about 15,000 megawatts of that solar, again, mostly built in state, or actually all of it built in state, plus a whole lot of wind, offshore wind. But 15,000 megawatts for the state, and with Montgomery County having just over a sixth of our population, our county will need about 2,500 megawatts of solar. So then the next question is, how much of that 2,500 megawatts can we build on rooftops? Well, we have actually a pretty good answer for that. Just a few years ago, the Department of Energy, National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL as it's known, used LiDAR from airplanes to actually quantify the solar capacity on rooftops in major US cities. And that included Metro Washington, DC, which means they covered basically all of the densely populated parts of Montgomery County. So got virtually most of our rooftops included. And in doing this, they looked at some other parameters besides just the size of the roof. Because LiDAR lets them do this, they could look at the shading, that is, how does the sun fall on the roof and are there any obstacles blocking part of the light, the angle, the tilt in relation to the sun, and how the roofs are facing. And from all of that, they were able to calculate how much solar potential there would be. That is called the technical potential. So that's what they came up with through LiDAR. And then the NREL goes on to make the point that actually there are different factors that affect what the potential really is. The biggest, of course, is actually bigger than that technical potential. What they call the resource potential is if you took all the solar panels and you put them out in the sun and you measured how much power would come from them, that theoretical physical potential of the panels, that's the resource potential. Technical potential is, because of those other factors, what LiDAR measured, somewhat smaller. Then there are other factors that also impinge on the potential that you actually are going to get. One of them is economics, as with everything. So that includes things like the cost of the technology and the availability of funding. But then there's what NREL calls market potential, which is, are there competing energy sources and what are the policies and regulations? For example, if there are offsets on roofs that are set particularly wide, that reduces the amount of solar panels you can put on that roof. So those are things that affect the potential as well. And then finally, there's what's called actual potential, which is when you climb up on the roof, how is it? It may have structural problems, there may be obstacles or impediments to building solar up there, and there may be other legal or ownership issues as well. Bottom line on all this is that when you look at the actual potential, it's generally estimated to be 25 to 50% of the technical potential. So for Montgomery County, that technical potential came out to be 2,350 megawatts, pretty close to the 2,500 megawatts that we need. But when you get to the actual potential, we actually use the generous 50% factor, but that gets you 1,175 megawatts, or just a bit less than half of the solar that we need in the county can be put on rooftops. Rooftop solar also has some other limitations. For one thing, expanding it will take time. That's because solar arrays are long-lived. That's good. They last 20 to 25 years. But it's not cost effective to put solar on a roof if you're going to have to replace it in, say, 7 or 10 years. That would mean you'd have to take the solar down, rebuild the roof, put the solar back up. Quite expensive, not cost effective. So the time to build solar is when a roof is new or recently replaced, and that will take more than a decade, probably less than 2, but quite a while, in a time when we're urgently trying to expand clean renewable energy. Another limitation of rooftop solar is that it basically serves the people under the roof, the people working or living there. Rooftop solar generally provides just part of the electricity that's used in a home or a business. If you have a really great sunny day, it may put out more than is actually being used in the building, and that extra goes out onto the grid, which is great. It takes some of the demand off and provides extra power when everyone's running their ACs. The result is there's a credit that goes onto the owner's bill, but then they use that credit later on either at nighttime or on a dull day in November. And so basically the benefit accrues to the rooftop owner. So rooftop solar is great. It certainly is an important part of the solar we need to build, but it isn't the way to do what Krista was talking about, which is to get solar to folks who can't put it on their own roofs. But what about parking lots? Well, Montgomery County certainly has a lot of parking lots and parking garages. The main limitation here is that if you're going to have people in cars underneath your solar panels, the structural requirements are much greater. And there are also electricity and safety factors they have to build in. And that makes the cost of parking lot and parking garage solar quite a bit more expensive. The result of that is that, although we don't have a lot of data on this, but the 2018 estimate was that a total of 1,800 megawatts of parking lot solar had been built in the whole United States. So that's less than we need in our county. And hopefully as prices come down and engineering gets better, there would be much more of this. But right now there are limits. The other point is that parking lot solar is like rooftop solar. Basically, it mainly provides electricity for the property owner. So if you have a big garage like this one at the bottom here, you probably also have a big institution like a hospital or a university that will use up that power. So at bottom, larger solar arrays that serve lots of households basically are quite large and do have to be built on open ground in most cases. Now, shouldn't that ground be commercial or industrial land? Well, here we come against the cost issue again, because commercial industrial land, and this isn't just Montgomery County, this is generally across Maryland and across most of the country, generally 10 to 100 times more than agricultural land. So this piece here, advertised on the sign, is just over $100,000 an acre. But land cost is a major part of the cost of building a solar project, and the small solar projects, we're talking about 2 megawatts, which are quite small by solar scale. that we're building here can't afford to pay this kind of high land costs. The other thing that comes up is brownfields and landfills. Brownfields are former industrial sites or mining sites or sand and gravel sites, like this abandoned factory on the right. With guidance from the Department of Environment, they can be remediated, cleaned up and capped. And in that case, they are good places for solar to be built. But in terms of Montgomery County, a nonprofit organization that works with the solar industry basically looked at all the brownfields that are potentially available in Maryland and found that our county has no solar feasible brownfields. We didn't have a lot of heavy industry like that picture in the right. We do have a couple of landfills, the Goody landfill and the Oaks landfill in Laytonsville. Oaks is about 550 acres, Goody is about 100. Both of them are closed. And the county actually right now has, not just planning, has actually, Crystal's happy about this, entered an agreement to build 2 LMI solar, low moderate income solar, community solar projects, 2 megawatts each on the Oaks landfill, plus another 2 megawatt net metered project that will provide some low cost power to the county and save taxpayers money. And the last point that we've heard quite often is, now that the Dickerson power plant is going to close, can we just build the solar at Dickerson? Well, the county has actually started looking at that. They've done GS evaluations and started talking and looking at the possibilities. GIS finds that there are up to 350 acres of solar potential. So that would be about 60 megawatts at Dickerson in 3 parcels. One administrative complication is that the parcels have 3 different owners, the 2 utilities plus the county. And actually the utility owners are considering having a smaller solar project, about 35 megawatts there, but there's no commitment yet, and they're kind of talking on a 5 to 10 year out possibility. But in either case, whether it's the 35 megawatt or the 60 megawatt project, it wouldn't replace the 300 megawatts we're talking about under the ZTA, and it wouldn't meet a huge chunk of our county solar need. This can't be the answer. So both Dickerson and ZTA are part of what we need to do. We support basically using all of these other ways to expand solar, whether it's rooftops or parking lots or landfills or everything that becomes available. But the reality is that to meet our solar energy needs and provide solar to people that can't put it on their roof, we actually need solar on agricultural land. And solar does have some other advantages besides the significant advantages of reducing greenhouse gases and air pollution and fighting climate change. For one, different from suburban and commercial development, it doesn't permanently take the land away, it doesn't take off the topsoil, doesn't create pollution, and it doesn't need new roads or schools or sewers that taxpayers have to pay for. But also, it offers dependable income that farmers can count on to deal with things like bad harvests or swings in crop prices and the generally low return of small farming. And it maybe can help send their kids to college or retire or keep the farm in the family. These are all real things that farm families are facing. And finally, combined with innovative agricultural practices, solar can actually add value to the agricultural sector. But with that, it's time for me to turn it over to Doug and Rob, who know a lot more about this. But thanks.
Great. So it's going to be Doug Boucher next, and I am going to do the screen share for his presentation now.
Thank you very much, everyone. Since I live in the agricultural reserve, I don't have a very good quality internet connection. It's satellite internet, so Shruti's going to display the slides, and I'm going to be just on audio for this. We've been asked often whether instead of solar in the ag reserve, we could use either new forests or changes in agricultural techniques to replace energy that solar would provide and to take greenhouse gases out of the air. And what I want to talk about is the comparison between three kinds of ways of approving the agricultural reserve. The top is the Poolesville, the town of Poolesville's solar panels with poppies blooming in the front. The bottom two are on our own farm here in Dickerson. The one on the left is reforestation, a 17-year-old stand of native forest that we've reforested, and the right is harvesting of soybeans, harvesting of corn on our land. The next slide, please. Shruti, can you advance the, very good. Yeah, before I go into the numbers, which of course are really important, but I also want to point out basic differences among these three solutions. Solar reduces the use of fossil fuels. It replaces fossil fuels in our electricity, and as we convert our vehicle fleet, our cars and trucks to electric vehicles, it also replaces the gasoline in internal combustion engines. Reforestation and regenerative agriculture approach it from a different point of view. They allow continued emissions of fossil fuels, and then they take some of the carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere. This is what scientists call sequestration. And Shruti, can you just go back one? Yeah, let's just finish up that same slide. The important difference among the three of them, whoops, going the wrong way. Okay, at least this, I see it, we're having technical problems here. Shruti, can you indicate what's going on?
Yes, we'll do a poll question just while we are setting this up again because there was some technical issue.
Could we take a quick intermission? Doug, can you sorry, Gary, do you mind? We have a series of polls that we both will help us collect information and are also a convenient way for us to buy ourselves about 15 to 30 seconds. Gary, do you mind throwing up one of the poll questions and we can try to get our technical issues organized? Much appreciation to whoever wrote that poll question.
Okay, I think we're back again. Shall I continue?
Let's give the poll another second to run. We're still getting some responses in.
Okay.
Can I get you to test your audio real quick, Shruti? Can you say something for us? We're having problems hearing Shruti.
Yeah, can you hear me?
It's slow. You were better earlier.
Is that better?
Yeah, the closer you are to your computer, the better.
All right, I'm sorry about the
It's okay.
happening today.
I'm going to close the poll now.
Okay, great. Gary, are you going to share the poll results?
We can see them.
Awesome.
And we know that 3% of you say you do not like monarch butterflies. Hmm.
The judgment.
No, I appreciate the honesty. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Shruti. I think we can close that and go back to the presentations.
All right, Doug, can you see it?
Okay, very good. So the distinction I was making among the three kinds of solutions is that solar reduces the use of fossil fuels and therefore all the pollutions associated with it. But reforestation and regenerative agriculture take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So they don't reduce the other sources of air pollution that are damaging to human health, causing cancer, asthma, et cetera. Crystal talked about this in her presentation. And as she pointed out, this air pollution especially impacts the health of people of color. So there is a difference between them in terms of climate justice. The other difference, of course, is that already reforestation and regenerative agriculture are allowed in the agricultural reserve, and in fact, not just allowed, but are subsidized by a variety of programs. There are county programs, state programs, federal government programs that support them. So there's a difference in terms of not only what they're doing right now, but the support that there's. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so how do the three compare in terms of how much they reduce climate change, how much climate benefit they provide? The difference is dramatic, and these are based on data from a review of the literature done by Sarah Villa, an extension agronomist at the University of Maryland, who looked at all the scientific literature and looked in particular about practices and estimates for the state of Maryland, and in some cases specifically for Montgomery County. And similarly, the solar estimates and the reforestation estimates are specifically for our region. And as you can see, the differences are very dramatic. Solar reduces greenhouse gases by just under 200 tons per acre every year. For reforestation, it's about 2.5, and for regenerative agriculture, it's about 1 to 2. Yeah, if we can get back to that slide, please. So the long and the short of it is that solar has climate benefits that are almost 100 times as great as reforestation and over 100 times as great as regenerative agriculture. And I have more detail on this and the sources in an additional slide, in 3 additional slides for later on. Okay, so that's the climate benefit, but we also want to compare them in terms of their ecosystem services. What is the impact on the ecosystem besides taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere or reducing emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? And here we have a fairly substantial study that was done on this by the Argonne National Laboratory and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory as part of what it was called the INSPIRE program. And they looked specifically at pollinator-friendly solar, which is the kind that is required in the state of Maryland and would also be required by the ZTA in Montgomery County. So let's look at the results from that. Next slide, please.
I have shared it.
Okay. Yeah. We've got 4 different graphics here that look at 4 different kinds of ecosystem services. In the upper left is the supply of pollinators, and as you'd expect, pollinator-friendly solar is the best. In fact, it's 3 times as many pollinators supported as agriculture. The upper right is carbon storage in the soil, so it's not just taking it out of the atmosphere, but actually storing it in the soil. and there's a 65% increase in carbon storage by pollinator-friendly solar compared to agriculture. The lower left shows sediment export, that is the loss of soil in due to erosion. And as you can see, the level for pollinators is really quite low. In fact, it's a 95%. Finally, in the bottom right, we see water retention, that is keeping water in the soil, keeping it on the land rather than running off in streams. And here again, pollinator-friendly solar has a very great advantage in terms of this ecosystem service. 19% reduction in the runoff of water, an increase in the water that is retained on the land. So not only in terms of climate, but also in terms of ecosystem services, pollinator-friendly solar is very beneficial. But besides the environmental benefits, we're also interested in the monetary value of the benefits provided. And we have results here from a study that was done by the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, looking at pollinator-friendly solar, conventional solar that is under turf grass, and just the farm itself. And this evaluated all the value in dollars of all the different services that were provided. So not only the increased revenue, the value of the carbon benefits, but the value in dollars of reducing soil erosion, conserving groundwater, and the increased crop yield from the presence of more pollinators. And as you can see, conventional solar does considerably better than farms without it. This is true for both soybean and corn production, but pollinator-friendly is even better than those. In other words, it has real advantages, not only in terms of climate and in terms of ecosystem services, but also in terms of dollars, both the private benefits to landowners and the social benefits for all of society. Okay, next slide. So, conclusions. Pollinator-friendly solar, which is the kind that will be required in the Montgomery County under the ZTA and is also required in the state of Maryland, is superior to either reforestation or regenerative agriculture in several ways. First of all, it directly reduces fossil fuel use and the damage to people's health from air pollution. It doesn't just take carbon dioxide out of the air after we emit it through fossil fuels. It actually reduces the fossil fuels and the air pollution associated with it. Secondly, in terms of the climate benefit, that is the emissions reductions per acre, it's about 100 times as effective as the alternatives, a little over 100 times for regenerative agriculture, a little less than 100 times as much as reforestation. It provides greater ecosystem services, conserves soil water, reduces erosion, stores carbon in the soil, and sustains pollinators, and provides greater economic benefits, both private and social economic benefits. So the conclusion is we need to encourage all three of these solutions, but we can't think of either reforestation or regenerative agriculture as not nearly as much benefits. It's not nearly at the same level as those two. It has other benefits. They have other benefits, for example, wildlife benefits from reforestation, but they can't replace the need for solar. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug. And I'm going to call on the next speaker, who is Rob.
Great to be with you all. Thank you so much, Shruti. Is my audio okay?
Yes, your audio is good. And just so that the participants know, we are tracking the chat. We can see Stephanie raised her hand. So let's just be done with our presentations and we will come back to you. Thank you so much for your patience. Rob, go for it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. What a great pleasure to be with you all this evening. I'm going to share some visuals, but this is just such a great topic to talk about and to share stories on. So I work for a nonprofit organization called Fresh Energy, and we really work hard to maximize the public benefit of this situation we're in, which is the clean energy transition. And we know firsthand, because we happen to be based in Minnesota, but we work on this topic nationwide. And we know that when farmers called us and said, what the heck is happening? What's going on? Why are solar farms doing this to the land? Well, solar got its start in the desert Southwest, some of the those sunniest parts of the country. And unfortunately, the land just looks like this out in California. A lot of it does in the arid regions. But those civil engineering plans, unfortunately, again, made their way across the Rockies, across the plains, and came to places where we can clearly see that there's abundant vegetation that can grow. We don't need to use the metaphor of a power plant, of an industrial facility, and yet those industrial designs, did make their way east. And so I'm absolutely 100% sympathetic to everyone on the call today that has this idea of industrial and fear and harm and negative trade-offs, because that's been created because a lot of the pictures that were been taken of these solar facilities come from the desert Southwest. And so thankfully, with the research and development we have all put into this, we know that we can do better. So we know that, solar projects, when they look like this, they cause farmers and other people in rural America to react, and that causes tension. And so we went about searching for answers and new approaches and different ways to build solar. And we found this beautiful picture that was shared by one of my panelists earlier. This is West Mill Solar Park in England, and it's gorgeous. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. So we called up these developers and these ecologists and asked them, what went right? What went wrong? This seems like a fantastic opportunity. How do we bring this to the United States and import it? And then we've shared that experience broadly, not just with folks in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa and throughout the Midwest, but also with developers and communities and states, including Vermont, New York, South Carolina, Virginia, all the way down to Florida, Texas, and people love it. People love it. In fact, there's so many projects that are planted and seeded and successful that you can just see picture after picture after picture of how beautiful these projects are. Because to some people, this is a power plant. I understand, and I'm completely sympathetic. But to other people, this is high quality habitat that happens to be financed by some solar panels. Because this is a before picture, and then 1 year later, and then 2 years after that. This is a transformative opportunity to put high quality habitat on the landscape that's paid for not by the state, not by the county, not by the community, but by the power companies. And it only works, very restrictive, it only works where plants grow. As you can see, this project is in Texas. Some of the other pictures are from Wisconsin, from Vermont, from Maryland, from Virginia, from Ohio. Pollinator-friendly solar is something that creates habitat where there used to be maybe turf grass, maybe row crops. It creates a significant net benefit. Importantly though, what does pollinator-friendly mean? And that's the role of public policy. You see the state of Minnesota and the state of Maryland and many states around the country have passed the Pollinator-Friendly Solar Act. And that's established a statewide standard as to what constitutes pollinator-friendly vegetation within the managed landscape of a solar project. And so it guarantees positive outcomes. When you say it's pollinator-friendly, it has to deliver on those pledges. So you can see that this idea of growing things under and around solar panels is rather new. It's rather new, right? And it's completely understandable that you haven't seen it before, you've thought it to be ludicrous, because there's so many pictures out there of gravel and sand and turf grass and garbage that it's unfamiliar. But it's new, and thankfully it's proven. There's more than 5,000 acres of pollinator-friendly solar sites today growing in more than 20 states. And so when you see pictures like this one in the upper right-hand corner, that's a 6 to 8 megawatt solar facility. That's not what's proposed for this county. If you see pictures like this one in the lower hand corner, that's a solar farm with some razor wire around it. That's not what's proposed. It's something fundamentally different, right? And so it takes us shifting out of this, I thought I knew solar. Well, it got better. It got a lot better. So Heidi Natura, the painter of this beautiful painting, gave me permission to help use it to educate folks. You can see the turf grass there on the left-hand side. And she gave me permission to add some solar panels. Now this is an old version of solar panels that are only about 24 inches off the ground. The newer models are 36 and 40 inches off the ground. But you can see how this isn't just benefiting pollinators, it's actually adding organic matter to the soil. So row crop lands currently, in Montgomery County, those have pretty shallow root systems, and they're not really enriching and building the topsoil or adding that soil organic matter. So with these diverse plant communities under and around solar panels, they're capturing that stormwater coming off the panels. They're channeling it down into the aquifer. They're capturing and preventing sediment from going into the waterways and into Chesapeake Bay. So there's active and exciting research happening on water quality as well. NREL's PV Smart program is looking at how these deep-rooted plants provide superior performance benefits. And as Doug mentioned, the INSPIRE study is looking at the agricultural compatibility of PV solar as well. So in the arid West, shade. Shade is a really hot commodity. And so growing basil and tomatoes in the shade of solar panels down in Arizona, or dryland cropping like it's happening right now in Oregon, pumpkins and peppers and potatoes as well as tomatoes on those communities. It's really a new kind of agriculture, a new kind of opportunity. Now, mind you, these are specialty crops, right? So we're not going to be, handing the keys to our farming sons and daughters and sending them out there with $1 million combine. These are hand harvested crops, right? So, but that said, the opportunity again for pollinator-friendly solar is to increase the abundance of the pollinators that are urgently needed in agriculture. And we've found that whether it's, it's apples in Minnesota, almonds in California, blueberries in Michigan, pumpkins and watermelon in the great state of Maryland, there's huge opportunities for increasing the abundance of pollinators in order to benefit those specialty crops. And because there's no insecticides or pesticides used on a solar farm, it's a great place outside the fence right next door to have organic farm. There's no pesticide drift coming onto your farm. And so here's some squash and tomatoes and watermelons in Wisconsin growing outside a pollinator-friendly solar farm, right? They're not getting any pesticide drift. They're getting the increased visitation from pollinators, and they're really thriving. This Amish farmer that's tending these crops sells them at a farm stand not too far from where I'm sitting. In fact, as Doug mentioned, these crops can actually increase the production of crops grown nearby. And then it's not just about crops, right? It's also about this opportunity for regenerative grazing so that you can actually have more and more sheep. And that can really benefit small farmers. Small farmers, I mean, the sheep that'll be grazed on pollinator-friendly solar farms, those shepherds will be paid $300 to $600 per acre to graze their sheep on these projects. It's a potentially fantastic windfall for existing and new farmers. And then beekeepers. Everybody loves local honey, particularly in a time where we're all thinking about health. Local honey provides significant benefits. And it's not just health benefits, it's also job benefits. And if honey isn't your thing, honey is a fantastic hero ingredient in beers. There's 4 different beers here. There's several more coming, that brewers and cideries are using honey from flowering solar farms as a hero ingredient to connect with their consumers and get those extra couple of dollars per bottle. Corporations also love this. Cliff Bar, Organic Valley, and many, many others are sourcing from pollinator-friendly solar farms. And then finally, if farming isn't your thing, if you're not interested in like whether we can do farming on these solar projects, let's just talk about the opportunity to conserve the eastern monarch, a species that, if current trends continue, will likely disappear within our lifetimes. So, for those of you on the call that have had a personal experience or an experience with a child or with your parent, that's an experience that you want to have with your child or with your grandchild. And what we're proposing, what this proposal would do, would open up the opportunity for private sector investment in this high quality habitat so that we can actually create new acres. You know, I think that we're talking about 1,800 acres or give or take. You know, if all of that were used, if, that would be 77 million new pollinator-friendly and native plants. So that's based on 3 plants per square foot, but it's a transformative opportunity to create solar sanctuaries for these wildlife that connect with us all and give us a sense of joy and peace. So I'm grateful to share this information with you all. It's just what I've seen, and I'll turn it back to you, Shruti. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate your presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Hans Riemer. I know that we have limited time and we're trying to make the most of it. So I just want to mention to people who are on the webinar that there are lots of questions. We got ahead of time. There are lots of questions coming in the chat. And so if you have questions, we will not be able to get to all of them today probably, but please put your questions in the chat because we will make an attempt to get the answers and share them with you. With that, I'm turning it over to Council Member Hans Riemer.
Thank you, Shruti. What an incredible panel. Thank you so much for all the presentations we've heard tonight. Really just deepened my understanding and my conviction that we're doing something really important here. I was particularly struck by Crystal Hansley's presentation about the users of community solar and how this is opening up access to many people who otherwise wouldn't have access to solar because they don't have a rooftop that they call their own. So it's an important part of the conversation. My own passion for conservation comes from growing up in California and spending my youth hiking in the Sierra Nevada, going on family trips to the national parks and you know, earning that passion for conservation step by step on backpacking trails, you know, as a young person. And I've tried to bring that into my work daily at the county council. You know, I'll be very short here. We have to do more to confront climate change, and we have to all, I think, get outside of our comfort zone, and we all have to be part of the solution. And that's really what this particular proposal is about. We have legalized community solar in other zones of the county. Several years ago, we passed a zoning ordinance change that removed or allowed community solar to be built elsewhere. Unfortunately, due to the reasons that Al Bartlett explained, we're not getting community solar much in the county. There's only 2 projects that have been built, or they haven't been built, I'm sorry. There's 2 projects that are in the pipeline. So if we want to open up this incredible possibility of community solar, we have to be willing to do more. And I think Montgomery County has to be part of the solution. It's not right, it's not moral, and it's not sustainable. It's not consistent with the principle of sustainability to say other communities will have to provide the solar. We don't have to do that here. So that really is kind of what's animating me. There's been a lot of concerns that have been raised. And so we have tried hard to listen, and we have tried hard to make changes. There are a number of specific provisions. I do want to mention that, you know, no project can be built unless it is has pollinator-friendly planting, or has grazing, or has agrivoltaics. Those are requirements in the zoning proposal. It must be one of those options. You can't do it if you aren't meeting one of those criteria. And similarly, we are now, thanks to feedback that it wasn't you know, tight enough, we have specified that it must be for community solar or for the aggregate net metering, which is a similar type of project, but it provides power directly to like nonprofits and other public benefit purposes. So we've provided specific legislation that language in the zoning that it must be those uses. We've exempted class 1 soil, which is the most productive soil. And we've ensured that this, any project will be subject to the county's very strong tree forest conservation law. Montgomery County has very strong rules around the conservation of streams, wetlands, stream buffers, forests, and all of those requirements will apply here. And so I just want to assure everyone that this isn't creating some kind of, entitlement to clear cut that doesn't already exist. Certainly a farmer can cut a forest anytime, subject to certain restrictions to plant a field. However, we're not saying you can cut more forest in order to plant solar. We're saying you are subject to the limits, which I think are nationally leading limits, protecting forests and stream valleys and wetlands and other measures. And the stormwater rules apply as well. So all of those important provisions have been considered, and we've strengthened those protections in the committee draft. So we've made changes at committee, and now we're sending the zoning change to the full county council for deliberation in September. And hopefully we will be able to pass it then. So thank you very much to everyone who's participating. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Shruti and the Sierra Club for your remarkable leadership. And I look forward to working with you going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Council Member Reamer. I'm going to start with Q&As, and we might go over time, so people are welcome to stay, and then we will follow up by email. So one of the first questions goes to Doug Boucher. This was a question we received in advance. What about the county's climate plan due this fall? Is this consistent with work group recommendations? Why should the county bother to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and engage over 100 citizens in developing a climate action plan if you are going to preempt the plan by changing agricultural zoning less than 90 days before the plan will be released? Why have an enormous time-consuming and expensive county climate planning effort if the Sierra Club is going to preempt its analysis and conclusions in supporting the Solar Ag Bill? Doug.
Yeah, I can answer that question with some direct experience, because I was on the climate plan group, on the subgroup that worked on sequestration. And we had a very heated debate within that subgroup about solar in the agricultural reserve. This was last winter, and we had no agreement on it. We decided in the end, rather than to make a recommendation either for or against it, to simply put in the report the positions pro and con, and those are in the report, and everyone will be able to read them. And I can tell you that they repeat some of the same arguments that you've heard in this debate over the last several months. So it's simply not true that the climate plan is going to present anything new about this question of solar in the ag reserve. It's not going to resolve it. It was not resolved by the climate work group, and it's got to be through a complicated process. It will hopefully come out and be presented to the county council for possible action next year, but it's not going to say anything one way or another in either recommending the council adopt zoning to allow or not allow solar in the agricultural reserve. So I would say, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the county's climate action plan is not going to tell us what to do about solar in the ag reserve. Waiting for it, though, will mean more delay. And of course, we have a commitment to reduce our emissions 80% by 2027 and be completely carbon neutral by 2035. And that's not just because it was adopted by the council, that's what the science demands. That's the kind of urgency for climate. So waiting around for more from the climate work group report is not going to solve our problem. It is going to lose us even more valuable time. Shruti, if you can show that slide, people can see some of the first couple paragraphs of the pro and con position, and I'd urge you to read the whole thing.
So thank you so much, Doug. We will share the presentation later. We will move on to the next question.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Great, Shruti, this is Josh. Did you want me jumping in here?
Yes.
Wonderful. So the next question I wanted to direct to David and Crystal. Please explain where the solar power generated in the ag reserve will actually be used. Nearly all of the ag reserve is in the Potomac Edison service area, which supplies West Virginia and Pennsylvania. How will this benefit Montgomery County in terms of the county generating objectives?
David?
Yeah, happy to chime in. Sorry, I was having trouble with mute. So I can start to answer part of this, and we'll do some additional research and can send around some additional information after. But for starters, I'd like to specify a little bit of this with the electrons that you use coming out of the wall of your house. There's no major specific way to tell what they came from. So in terms of if they came from a coal plant, a gas plant, a solar farm, a wind farm, that's all muddled up as soon as they get put onto the grid and dispersed throughout the whole PJM territory. And so one thing that I'd like to flag, I think that there were a bunch of similar questions about are solar power plants displacing fossil fuels? And the short answer is they are displacing fossil fuel generation. So we are seeing, if the solar plants weren't there, then we would be getting that same electricity just from a fossil fuel resource. So when it's bright and sunny and we're getting electricity off of a solar panel, that is replacing the same amount of electricity that would be coming from something else. That demand is there, it's being met with something else, a cleaner resource. So we are displacing the amount of generation that's coming from the portions that would otherwise be coming from fossil fuels. So that's one factor that I'd like to point out. The other one that I'd like to say is I think that there's a lot of conversation around specific boundaries, what benefits one county versus one state versus another county or another. And I really think it's important for us to look at, again, not just climate pollution, but what are the secondary and other pollutants that are associated with the fossil fuel burning. So as I said, when we're displacing a megawatt hour or a kilowatt hour that would otherwise come from a fossil fuel generator, we're also getting the co-benefits associated with that reduced climate pollution. We're getting the co-benefit of reduced other pollutants. In the slides that I had early on, I talked about sulfur dioxide, smog-forming nitrogen dioxide, and nitrogen oxide, et cetera. And those also get displaced when we get a megawatt hour or kilowatt hour from a solar farm instead. So why is that important when we're talking about Maryland and Montgomery County specifically? If we're getting upwind pollution, which is a historic issue in Maryland from West Virginia, that is negatively impacting us. So over 85% of Marylanders live in counties that are failing to meet healthy air standards from the EPA. That includes Montgomery County. And so the upwind pollution is a significant factor there. So if a solar farm is on the part of the grid where it's more likely to displace a kilowatt hour or megawatt hour that would come from a West Virginia coal plant, that still provides benefits to the state of Maryland because it is, again, displacing that pollution associated with a fossil fuel plant that would have otherwise been operating. Are there lots of fossil fuel plants left on the grid? Yes. Are they running less, especially when it comes to coal, the dirtiest one out there that's coming out of the stacks? Yes. And that's what those earlier slides that I was trying to point out. The coal generation has seen a steep decline. We need much more solar and wind to displace the gas that's coming, that has recently come online. But we are really working hard to do that. And that's why we're seeing benefits, but we just need a lot more in order to get further down the road. So it doesn't answer the question perfectly. I absolutely admit that. Maybe Al or someone else wants to chime in. But I wanted to really emphasize that we are displacing generation output that would otherwise be there from fossil fuels, and we get upstream benefits, both climate and air pollution associated with that. So I do want to make that clear. This is a positive, even if it's displacing something that's from another state. I don't know if anybody else wanted to chime in, though. I'll go on mute now. I talked a lot there.
Thank you so much, David. Al?
Yeah, just to add a couple of points specific to the Potomac Edison question. Once again, the county has done some important homework on this, and they have looked at the issue in question, and it turns out, yes, it's certainly true that most of the ground in the Ag Reserve is in Potomac Edison territory. But when the county looked at all that land, and if you took out forested land, easements, and parkland, about a quarter of the Ag Reserve land is in the PEPCO territory. And there's a small chunk that's actually, not that small actually, that's in BG&E territory. And so one answer is that not all of it's going to be built in the Potomac Edison area. So because there's substantial demand in both the PEPCO and the BGE territories, it's likely that those will be places where some, certainly at least of this, will be built. The other is that I just want to make the point that the West Virginia and Pennsylvania issue, there is plenty of potential uptake for solar that's generated. Again, we're talking about only 300 megawatts, again, compared with that 2,500. So even within the Ag Reserve, we've got towns like Damascus and Poolesville and Clarksburg, and some smaller ones like Boyd's and Barnesville and Dickerson that are there. But then also in the Potomac Edison territory, there's Frederick County and Frederick City, which is now Maryland's second largest city. In Washington County, there's Hagerstown. There's plenty of opportunity for offtake of the solar that's generated in the Potomac Edison territory and still keep it within Maryland, if not necessarily within the county. So I'm not sure that West Virginia and Pennsylvania are going to be the ultimate recipients. But anyway, those are just a couple of important factors to consider.
All right, well, next question is for you, Al, so you can respond to that as well. The question is, you appear to be ignoring an expert regarding grid capacity and failure of the ZTA to accomplish the county's stated goal. Do you believe the FERC engineer, or do you not care whether the ZTA moves the county towards its goals?
Okay, well, let me say, certainly we do care whether the county and the ZTA moves the county towards its goal. And the question is it was a very technical one and a complicated one, which basically made the point that there is a choke point in the grid where energy is coming in. As David mentioned, we get a substantial part of our energy, more than a third, almost 40%, from outside the state. In this mouth of Monocacy Road substation is a relatively limited capacity. But you know, I confess to not being an electrical engineer, and David isn't either. But what we did do, because we took this question very seriously, because it has serious implications, was we actually consulted with people who are electrical engineers and others who are actually engaged in building solar at scale, both nationally and here in the region. And so we turned to them for the answer. The answer is that the person who made the observation is not correct. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that the amount of energy that's going to be generated by this plant does not approach the critical threshold of capacity of the mouth of Monocacy substation. So that's one. It basically, that's not, and we're not generating enough to actually create a critical constraint. But the other was, and this is very interesting, that the effect will not be, if the electrons we do generate will take load demand off the power that has to come into the state. That's actually a good thing.
Right.
About energy independence. But it's not just a question of the laws of physics, as the author of the comment said, but it's really about the way the PJM power market works, which is that the capacity that we need in the grid, PJM works to fill up with what's called the lowest marginal cost of dispatch power supplies that are available. So you start with the very lowest and you build up as you get to more expensive sources until the capacity is filled. So the stuff that's coming into us, a fair amount of it is from coal or gas or nuclear, which are all, particularly coal and nuclear, quite expensive. But by creating low-cost power on this side, what we actually do is reduce the top of the price tiers coming in. So what we actually do is shave off the more expensive power from what's coming in. And actually the result is lowering cost. And there's a great article about how this effect worked in Texas, where their grid works just like our grid does in that same pricing rate. And the bottom line is that over the last several years, Texas has saved almost $6 billion by exactly this effect, by creating more clean renewable energy, which has actually reduced the generation and moving of energy from other dirtier sources. So basically, both of those reasons, coming from experts, not just from us, I'm doing my best to channel them, mean that the point actually does not hold.
All right, thank you, Al.
Thanks, Al. The next question is for Councilmember Reamer. Can you specify where in the zoning text amendment the reference to community solar is? There seems to be some questions and confusion about that piece of it.
Yes, we, if a person who's looking, please be sure you are seeing the version as amended by the committee, because we added that in the original draft. We had just limited the size of the parcels that could be used to those that we knew were usable for community solar. But in response to concern that that wasn't direct enough, we amended that so that along with other changes that we added based on concerns about, for example, the protecting existing wooded areas and stream buffers and drainage courses and wetlands, all big priorities for the Sierra Club. Sierra Club testified at our public hearing urging that we add language verifying that all of those important priorities would indeed be protected as necessary findings in the site plan. And so we have added protections in the committee draft. It's lines 10 to 12. So just please be sure you're looking at the committee draft and not the draft as introduced, because the committee draft is where we, is the draft that has the changes applied to it that we made at committee. And it includes, for example, the language about it has to be community solar, that all those other protections that we've added, the aggregate net metering and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. Crystal, the next question is for you. Is this community solar or industrial?
So this is specifically community solar. This is not solar that's built on gravel and rocks, deteriorating the land. This is for our ecosystem and pollination and regenerative, agriculture.
Okay, great. We have the next question for Doug. Should high quality productive farmland be preserved for food production purposes, considering the positive environmental impacts of such action? How and why are you justifying the loss of our own local food and economic security, non-renewable fertile land loss for corporate solar development? This is not a win. This is short-sighted and does not hold a candle to what true sustainability actually is. How would removing 1,800 acres of farmland affect our food security? If one uses the agricultural census data on acres devoted to different crops, what percentage of the food consumed in Montgomery County would come from that 1,800 acres? Doug, you are on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, Shruti, if you can get up my slide number 11, the one titled Montgomery County's Farmland. This has the data from the Census of Agriculture that shows exactly how our farmland is used. While you're getting that up, let me try to summarize this. First of all, I think we've shown quite abundantly that it is not taking land out of agricultural production, that in fact you can do agricultural production of crops, you can do grazing of animals, or you can use pollinator-friendly solar, which, as we've shown, has benefits for agriculture, both in terms of the ecosystem services that it provides and also in terms of direct dollars and cents. Yeah, if you can move forward to the slide number 11. I think the question, though, is based on the assumption that Montgomery County gets a lot of its food from the agricultural reserve. And unfortunately, this is not the case, not at all. In fact, less than 1% of Montgomery County's food, less than 1% of Montgomery County's food comes from the agricultural reserve, and conversely, less than 1% of the agricultural reserve's production is consumed in Montgomery County. We get our food from the same industrial food system that prevails over the entire country. We get our vegetables from all over the country, etc. If you look at the actual use of land in Montgomery County, the predominant crops are the commodity row crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat. Corn makes up about 19% of our land, soybeans 22% of the land, and wheat 12% of the land. Another 13.5% are used for making hay and other forages, in other words, to feed livestock, mostly horses actually, rather than other kinds of livestock. And 17.5% is pasture land, again, used to feed livestock. In terms of the actual things that you buy from the farmer's market or from your CSA, very, very little of it comes from the county. And in fact, only 0.6% of the land in the county is used for orchards, that is, for fruit production, and that includes, by the way, wineries. So it's simply not true that our food security depends on the ag reserve. In fact, the ag reserve is part of the same commodity production system, producing feed grains, forages, for a meat-intensive. So the question of how much would our food security suffer if 1,800 acres out of 65,000 acres were put into solar, the answer is practically nothing, and in many ways we probably would benefit because it would make it possible to produce fruit crops and vegetable crops under solar panels more profitably than they can be produced right now. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Shruti, is that back to me? Sorry, Shruti, are you alternating back to me at this point?
Yes, the question is back at you, Josh.
Great, I apologize. Can you tell me which number we are on?
It's in the chat.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. So for Councilmember Reamer, can you talk to us about the potential design options for solar in the ag reserve and clarify how they're compatible with different ag uses and protect water, soil, wildlife corridors, etc. And I think part of the follow-up is can you guarantee that no trees will be cut and agricultural potential will be maintained? And if not, can you just talk about like what protections do exist so that people understand, practically speaking, what this zoning amendment does and does not do?
Thank you. What I can guarantee is that the county's forest conservation law applies. So we have a whole set of laws around protecting stream buffers, streams, forests, other environmental resources that really are considered among the strictest in the nation. And they apply in this setting. So a farmer who wants to build a field, a dual use field, solar and farming, whether it's the pollinator plants or agrivoltaics, crops, or grazing, would need to meet the requirements of those important protections. And there's no exemption from those protections for doing solar. I think some may have been concerned that a solar field would not have been subject to those strict protections, but they are. And we clarified that. And in fact, we added some language to the zoning text amendment that we call belts and suspenders, which just states that fact in the zoning text amendment so that there's no confusion. I think the fact that the forest conservation law isn't in the zoning change may be confusing to some, because this is not an island. Like, this isn't all of the rules that a solar project would be subject to. This is simply allowing you to do something, but it is an allowance that is subject to many other requirements and limitations. So that I think some may have read the zoning text amendment and not realize that while you may now do this, you can only do it subject to all of these other restrictions. So the forest conservation law is a good one, a good example. And I will tell you, I spoke to a farmer today who said he thought he had some land on his farm that was on a slope that he couldn't really put a crop on, and maybe it would work for solar. And I said, well, I'm not sure you can actually, because there's going to be some limitations for erosion. We don't want to have we're going to limit how steep of a slope you can put these panels on, to prevent concerns of erosion and so forth. So there are a lot of protections that are in, and again, our intent is what's called dual use. It's to retain the land in agricultural use, so that you're getting agricultural benefit from the land. And I think that's the essential ingredient here. This is consistent with the vision of the agricultural reserve. It's consistent with the use of agriculture of the land. And if it was not consistent, it would not be appropriate. But thanks to the innovation in dual use, it's now possible to use land for both solar and agriculture. And I think our county should be part of the vanguard of demonstrating how to do that. To me, that's a great benefit of having the vision to create the agricultural reserve in the first place, is now we can be part of adapting energy and agriculture together and getting the benefits of both. So why wouldn't we, Montgomery County, want to be at the forefront of pioneering new approaches that sustain agriculture and save the planet from emissions and climate change? Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, will renting land to community solar companies provide revenue for small farmers? I think this was in Al's presentation, and I'm just going to add to that and see if Doug or Al want to say anything more on this. Are there landowners who are actually interested in installing solar panels? Doug, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I can tell you there are. I'm one of them. And just to give you an idea of the benefits for small farms, we have 77 acres. That's less than the average in the county. And as you may or may not know, the ZTA limits solar projects to one per farm. So it provides very little benefit for the really big farms, the farms of 500 and 1,000 acres that have most of the land in the county. But it provides real substantial benefits to those of us who have small farms because we can't make very much money from farming or from renting our land for farming, but we can make considerably more. Give you an idea of the benefits. The rates for leasing land for solar are running on the order of $1,500 to $1,600 per acre. The typical rates for leasing land for crop production are around 120 to 150. So it's basically a tenfold difference, which since there's only 10 acres possible for each farm, makes a great deal of difference for small farms, but very little difference for the big farms. Farmers are not very enthusiastic about solar power. They're not going to be able to increase their revenue by any substantial amount.
Thank you, Doug. Al, did you want to add?
Yeah, well, I guess the only thing I would add is that in some parts of the country, renewable energy projects have actually made farming feasible, saved a number of farms. But if you look at it, Doug showed some data from the agricultural census. There's some interesting data in there too about the farmers who live in the agri-reserve. The Ag Census 2017 identified 558 farmers. Of those, over 70% had actual incomes from their farming of less than $10,000 a year. Over half of that 558 farmers had incomes of less than $2,500 a year. And the average income, net income, taking out production costs, across all of the farms, including the big ones that are quite profitable, was a negative $6,430 a year. And so the possibility that this might offer some economic opportunity for some of those farmers out there, plus the fact that the average age of farmers, again, from the Ag Census, is late 50s, and many of them are in their 60s or 70s. And so having some extra reliable income certainly is probably worth considering as an opportunity. And it's just there. It is indeed an opportunity.
All right, thank you. We'll take two more questions. One of them is for Crystal, and then we will come to Doug. Crystal, will the county invest in the solar farms and use them as community solar to allow low-income households who cannot afford to purchase their own solar or live in apartments participate in a solar program?
Well, simply that's the goal. And, you know, to highlight one of the projects that we know is the Oak Field, that's all LMI, but that's not enough. Without having specific LMI community solar farms in the pipeline or coming out. It's kind of the same barriers in the open category where you need to have a credit score requirement like the 680 or 700 just to get into the other community solar pilot programs if it's not specific for low and moderate income. So simply we need more. The landfill wouldn't just fulfill the requirement for all low income households in Maryland. And so, yeah, there's investment from the county, which owns the landfills, and also private dollars. So it's just like, why should taxpayers have to cough up all the money? So that's a huge incentive for opening it up for more LMI households to get into the green revolution and solar revolution.
Thank you, Crystal. Josh, are you asking the last question to Doug? It's almost 9 o'clock, so we will do one more question. We have many more, but we will put them all together and share it.
Thank you. For Doug, the last question, my understanding, this is the person submitting it, is that not all crop soils and growing methods trap carbon in the soil. What will work here in Montgomery County?
Yeah, this was precisely the objective of the study by Sarah Villa that provided the data that I used for my graphic on regenerative, for the data on regenerative agriculture in my slide. First of all, in general, agriculture is a net loser of carbon. Agriculture causes emissions of carbon, not sequestration. And this is particularly true for the major crops that are grown in the county and that dominate corn, soy, and wheat, so-called root crops. And the basic reason is that they leave a lot of bare soil between the crop plants. The bare soil is there because of tillage and because of the use of herbicide to control weeds in between the crop plants, which gives you more corn and soy, but also gives you more soil from which carbon dioxide can and is lost. So in general, pollinator-friendly vegetation that completely covers the soil with vegetation is better. In terms of agricultural techniques, and this is shown in Sarah Villa's review, the ones that are best are things like cover crops, particularly over the winter, like no-till or reduced tillage farming, where you don't turn over the soil and therefore you don't expose as much soil to the atmosphere and make its carbon vulnerable to loss of the atmosphere. Diversifying rotations with different crops is also possible. So in fact, if you want to know what works, Sarah Villa's review and her webinar was actually titled Sequestering Carbon in Agricultural Soil, What Works? And those are the kinds of crops and the kinds of techniques that actually do it. I would reiterate that, they are good for reducing the emissions from agriculture, but the amount of reduction of carbon dioxide that they provide is very small compared to what solar does. It's about 1% of what solar would be doing it. We should be doing reforestation as well. But in terms of actually making a difference in terms of the climate crisis, we need renewable energy, and particularly solar in Montgomery County.
Well, thank you, Doug. And it is a little over 9 o'clock, so we will wrap up. But I just want to thank all of you who joined us today. Thank you so much, Council Member Reamer. Thank you to all our panelists. 2 of them had to leave and could not stay after 8:35. I just want all of you to know we understand it is a complex issue. We understand there are people on both sides of the issue. And as part of the environmental community, we are respectful of all perspectives. This session was put together to provide as much information as we can. We have tried to pick the questions that were not supporting our position, just so that we could provide information and acknowledge that we hear you, and we are, glad to answer all the questions that we can to provide fact-based answers to you. And for all the questions that were not answered today, we will put all the information together, the ones that were answered and the ones that were not answered. We might follow up directly with you on an email, and we will figure out how to put it all together and share it with all of you. So please look out for a follow-up email from us. And again, as the chair of the Sierra Club Montgomery County Group, I want to thank you on behalf of the Montgomery County Group and as part of the Sierra Club team. To everyone who participated today, thank you for your patience and your participation. Josh, did you want to do some closing remarks?
Thank you so much, Shruti. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight, and thanks to all of the panelists. Sierra Club is an activist organization. That means that our instinct is to act. We know that public policy is shaped by people demanding action, and then by the democratic process and participation. We think that this ZTA has been strengthened by all of the voices that have weighed in to shape it as even stronger legislation. And we think that people participating will continue to strengthen it. We also believe that we urgently need to be deploying renewable energy and taking action to address climate change, not in 3 months, not in 3 years, but right now. And that is the reason why Sierra Club is leaning into this uncomfortable issue. Believe us, it would be easier if we didn't, but we're leaning into this uncomfortable issue because we believe that action on climate is so important to be taking right now. We appreciate and respect everybody who's been weighing in. Thanks for your support, your comments, your questions, your critiques. This is all helping this debate. We look forward to an ongoing conversation and a really, really long follow-up email that you'll be getting in the next couple days. On continuing to work together to address the global climate crisis globally and right here in Montgomery County. So thanks to all of the attendees, thanks to all the participants, thanks to Councilmember Reamer and Crystal and Al and Hans and Doug and David and Shruti. Thank you all for a wonderful discussion tonight.